Welcome everybody to Tangent TV. My name is Joseph Lanzalata, and today we are lucky enough to have with us the one and only Brian Mac Intyre. Brian, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me, Joe.
Absolutely. So quick intro to Brian. Brian is a journalist and screenwriter with extensive experience working for major employers on both sides of the Atlantic. You can hear my American accent. I'm proud to say he's worked in America as well, including RTE Radio, the Sunday Business Post, and the Salt Lake Tribune, among others. Recent years, he has retrained to become an immersive content creator, storyteller, and pitching coach, and has used these skills to set up part-time consultancy firm storiesforbiz.com. He says one of his proudest moments has been inadvertently providing material for something that he will tell you about in a short amount of time. He has many stories to share, and I am going to help him share them. But for the most part, Brian, I want to give you the space to tell us about all of your experiences. And I had asked you for some of your top tips that might be applied for business students today. So I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us. But maybe you could start us out with a bit of a background and intro to you, how you got into journalism, and we'll go from there.
So I did economics and politics in Trinity. It was BESS. It was just changed to BESS while I was doing the course. Then an MHA, which is Masters in Journalism at DCU. And I essentially started off as a business reporter, freelance, for a couple of papers, the Sunday Tribune and the Irish Press, chiefly among those, and Business and Finance magazine. Then I went to the States in '93. And on what was called Morrison visa, and in '95 I got a job working for the Associated Press in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so as you asked me to go through my career and give the learnings, in that kind of a frame, the first learning I have is that content is king. So in the Associated Press, essentially it's a news cooperative. So all these small, what they call in America, all these mom and pop papers, small local papers, would contribute stories to the Associated Press head office in their particular states. And then those stories would be rewritten by journalists at the AP. And then they would go out to the whole state, basically. And some stories would be so interesting or different or just kind of like, what? That they'd actually they'd be offered up to what's called the A-wire, which is a national wire. And so one of those stories, I should also say that those stories are, sometimes you're rewriting them for broadcast news. So sometimes you're kind of writing headlines. So I would be rewriting the news stories for headlines that night for the next morning, and I'd wake up in the morning, I'll be listening back to my own words in the local radio station, the local NPR affiliate. So that was kind of fun, little trippy as well. But anyway, so with this one story landed on our desk from a local paper one night, and a man about 78 or so had ridden his riding mower up to the local sheriff's office in small town Arkansas, right? And he had a dispute over I think it was a $15 water bill. And he actually shot the sheriff. And then he didn't kill him, but he shot the sheriff. Thankfully, he didn't kill him. And then he made his getaway. How do you think he made his getaway?
What, on his tractor, I'm imagining.
On his riding mower, right? Yeah. And so that goes out to the A-wire for it's not from our bureau. And sure enough, when I came home every night, I would watch David Letterman, right? And so Late Show with David Letterman was one of the two main talk shows at that time. This is sort of the mid-90s.
And a graphic for you.
Yeah, there we go. And so it was Letterman and Leno were the two main talk show rivals. So I was a Letterman guy, and they had in his opening monologue, he said he actually recounted that story in his opening monologue, and I was like, oh my God, that's the story I wrote, because he had obviously got it off Associated Press and distributed, and so his writers got it off of them, and he also talked about the fact that the guy made his getaway in the riding mower, so he had a big chuckle about that. So the point of the story is that, you know, the more content you write, the more traction you can potentially get. So whether it's content for a blog, or if you're interviewing a business person or whatever, there is a chance that it will get picked up by other outlets. So one good example would be a company called Van Winkle's, which is a mattress company in the States. And they made this, they had this survey conducted of people's sleeping habits on their mattresses. And they found that people who slept on the right-hand side were more likely to have nightmares than people who slept, people who slept on the left-hand side were more likely to have nightmares than people who slept on the right-hand side, right? And so this story was picked up by the Daily Mail, and of course went on their website, which is, I think, in the top 3 websites in terms of viewership of media websites in the world. So you can write, you know, this content that does get a lot of traction, because newspapers are looking for content to fill their holes as well, and radio stations and stuff. So.
And if I could just go to there, Brian. Yeah. So in that regard, like with those things, with every startup who's launching an idea wants to get their idea out there and let everybody know this is the next thing. Is it just kind of a content volume play of guessing game if I'm going to put out as many of these potential stories and then hope that one gets there? Or is there any sort of a science therein that you can kind of work with?
Well, you got to have content that you think will reach outside your immediate audience, that will resonate with people generally, essentially. So, you know, and I mean, one way to try to see if a story would work outside of your immediate bubble, if you like, as opposed to a COVID bubble, which means sort of, you know, friendship or a college bubble, would be just to ask, I don't know, maybe somebody who's in a different college or in a different course entirely, or some friends or some friend in a foreign country, does this resonate with you? And then if it doesn't really resonate with them, then it may not be the piece of content that's worth investing your time in, to be honest.
Got it.
So it's all about sort of finding content that will reach a much wider audience rather than a smaller audience, because the papers are trying to pick stories that have the most impact on their readers, and the same with the radio stations as well. So.
Okay.
So yeah, so after the Tribune, I got a job at after the AP, I got a job at the Salt Lake Tribune, and in Utah. And people say, you know, what was it like working in an American paper? And it was exactly like The Wire, season 5. You know, it's pretty much looks exactly like the newsroom we had in Salt Lake. They've since moved offices and changed ownership and stuff, but it was this paper owned by this Irish American family, actually, and so our main rival was the Mormon paper, and we were in a joint operating agreement whereby we shared printing press and ad revenue and stuff. So each ad went in both papers. And so that's where I learned to be a headline writer. And again, in terms of learning for students, you know, headline writing is a lot like writing tweets, essentially, because you're trying to compact as much information as you possibly can in as small space as is possible, or as you're given. And you really have to sort of get to the point. And sometimes you might only have, you know, a couple of words to say something. And, you know, if you're trying to write sort of headlines that are going to grab your audience's attention for your blog items, or for any kind of marketing materials for your startup, and if you're stuck, oftentimes you actually find just rereading the copy you've written a few times will help you actually find the answer. And so I had this one, before you cue it up, Joe, I had this one headline, and I'll pose the problem first. So headlines, like a lot of businesses, they're about solving problems. You're trying to solve the problem of how do you get the most salient information in as few words as possible onto the page. And so we had a story. It was a recipe for a big side of pork, And it was actually around this time last year, and it was in a Sunday newspaper. And so I had about 3 words to figure out, what do I say to pull people into the story, into this recipe, and so they might actually read it. And, I actually found the answer in the copy, because it was a big side of pork, but there's another word for side, and once that word jumped out to me, then an idea jumped out to me. So this is what I had in my headline.
I love it.
So that was a bit of fun, It was, and the thing is, if you can engage the audience by getting their attention, and if you can make them smile, then that's an extra bonus. So, obviously, though, when you're writing headlines for your content, you only kind of bring the fun in when it's appropriate. You wouldn't do it necessarily on something related to COVID, obviously, or any kind of COVID, advances in actually fighting the virus. So so content is king, and you have to say as much as you can possibly in as few words as possible. I guess the third learning, when I was at Salt Lake, I also got to, we were there during the 2002 Winter Olympics, which was, a massive deal for any local paper, really. And so it's the Winter Olympics obviously are smaller than the Summer Olympics, but and I've never been to a Summer Games, but it was a lot of fun. And so it's almost like the size of the Winter Games might be more actually negotiable, if you were to go to your first Olympics. But anyway, and I think they picked the cities based on their the kind of facilities they have nearby. Salt Lake has some world-class resorts, ski and snowboarding resorts nearby, within less than a sort of 40 minutes from the airport, or less than an hour, and so there's great infrastructure there. And when I checked with the Irish team, and I found out that we had 8 Olympians going over to Salt Lake. And so I decided, as well as working for the newspaper, we were on 6-day weeks for those 2 weeks, because there was a huge amount of work to do. Because we were essentially the Irish Times of Utah for that one event, really. And so, and we probably had more staff than the other main rival paper as well. So we really had to do a good job of covering properly. And but I thought, well, I think I'm the only Irish guy here, and so I've got the run of the playground to myself. So I should try and cover for Irish media as well. So I decided to go outside my comfort zone, and essentially just immerse myself in Olympic sports or winter sports, which I knew very, very little of, if anything. And luckily, I grabbed a copy of the New York Times. They had a 12-page supplement and cheat sheets for all different sports. So I was able to sort of bone up on the main things you would, sort of get a basic grip on the events. Now, I didn't really cover a lot of events, but there was one event which I had to cover because we had a medal hope in it, a guy called Clifton Wriothesley. And I was, the Irish team, the chef de keep was, he thought it was a little odd initially when I contacted them before they came to Salt Lake, because he thought it strange there was an Irish reporter living in Salt Lake. But then, I managed to convince him that, I was legit and I was leaning for a few Irish papers and stuff. And so I actually made my debut on what was then 5/7 Live, now Drive Time on Radio 1, and did 4 live spots for them. And that was fun, doing live radio. And again, it's all about, you have about maybe 5 minutes. And if students are ever on the radio, just kind of, jot down which the main points you are that you want to, talk about, say if it's your startup, and just make sure you kind of hit your marks on those points, and don't sort of, go on too much longer. Then you want to make sure that the interviewer has plenty of time to get in with their questions as well. So anyway, I got to cover the games for about 5 Irish outlets, for RT, the Star, the Irish Times, the Sunday Tribune, and the Irish Independent. And I was even on the, on the cover of the Irish Independent, because the Clifton Wriothesley, he came, I think, third or fourth in the trials, and on the day itself, he actually came fourth. So, but there was great excitement because it was a big deal. It was the closest, I believe, that we ever got to a Winter Olympics medal. So when you go outside your comfort zone and you know, learn about new areas, then you're also kind of investing in your own ability to create more content later on, essentially. So it will open up other opportunities for you as well, because, you know, like I couldn't believe I actually got to work for 5 outlets at the same time I was working for my paper in those 2 weeks. So it was a crazy 2 weeks, but it was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And I might just jump in. I was just like, because I think this connects a lot. I just want to make the connection here to a lot of the students who are taking that risk of jumping off and like trying to launch a startup in a field that they have an interest in, and it might go somewhere, but it's, well, I'm in my course of study right now. I'm studying, you know, most of my days, every hours of every week is spent this, but this is another part-time thing. And most of what I talked to them about is exactly what you're saying. It's like, try it, do some research, get to know your key points, see when you go out there and then talk to people. And the numbers who have had that opportunity because of taking that risk, it's immense. You'll surprise yourself. So it's a really cool connection there.
Yeah, I mean, learning is a win-win. Anything new you learn is, and also anything you learn opens up neural pathways in your brain as well, you know. And so you're creating motorways, you know, that it will only help you be, you know, well, for your brain health is really important. So
absolutely. All right, so top tip number 4.
Yeah, so number 4 is basically ask unexpected questions. So actually, you know, I did get to, when I lived in New York for a bit, and I got to go to the Letterman show itself, and we were told, you know, a few hours before the show started, oh, Dave comes out to the audience and he says, anybody got any questions? So think of a good question. And as a journalist, and I've also done covered the Toronto Film Festival, where you go to these what they call roundtables, and it's you and 3 other journalists, say, interviewing somebody like I don't know, like Matt Damon or whatever, and whoever, and you basically share the answers among yourselves. So, but everybody gets a turn to ask a question, and that's the way it works out. You know, as a journalist, you're trying to ask a question that hasn't been asked before, because you're really trying to engage them, because they do so many of these back-to-back interviews that they get really tired and they start to give kind of rote answers, which isn't their fault. It's only kind of human. So for Letterman, my question, he says, anybody got any questions? I left my hand, and I think I stood up or something, and he says, what's your question? I said, you know, I'm wondering which cartoon character you most identify with, right? It's a totally oddball, you know, off the wall question, but Letterman, as you know, is a bit like that. And so he just smiled, and then for a long pause, and he goes, I think it's time for you to get back in your seat. so no. in a nice way, like I took it as a win, that I kind of made him speechless almost, in a good way, you know. So that's fun. Absolutely. And so in the when you ask these questions, you can often you know, get answers that you know, when you ask an unexpected question, you can get unexpected answers. So I give an example first, then we'll apply it to business. So there was a movie called Undertow with Dermot Mulroney, and he's most famous for being in a film called My Best Friend's Wedding with Julia Roberts. And so it's sort of a famous rom-com, essentially. And so there was one question I always, you know, he's famous for being a character actor, and he's in Young Guns and a ton of other stuff. And I was always wondering this one question about him, and I thought this is my opportunity to ask him. And so I go into the interview room with him, and oftentimes there'll be a publicist there. And so, it's not as freeing sometimes in that respect, because there's somebody looking over you, but where it's just the two of you, it feels more of a natural conversation. And so my first question to him was, and it wasn't a hard question, it's just an unexpected question. I said, what was it like growing up with the name Dermot in America, right? And obviously Dermot Mulroney is like, probably 100% Irish American. So he's like, oh my God. He goes, I've probably spent a year out of my 41 years either explaining or pronouncing or spelling my name, and everything was fine until that damn frog Kermit came on the scene when I was 5 years old. And you know how kids are, it was Kermit, Dermot, Schmermit, I just couldn't get away from it. So in my intro to that interview, I was able to write, the first line was, you can forgive Dermot Mulroney for not being the biggest fan of Kermit the Frog as a kid, right? Because I knew that would pull people and be like, why would you like Kermit the Frog? So that was fun to do that. So that was definitely an unexpected answer I got from him. And I'm pretty sure that he wasn't asked that question before, just by his reaction, because he really engaged with that big time. And so say, for instance, you're working for, you're working on a pharma startup idea, and you're doing some research on that. And say you're talking to a top scientist or a chemist or somebody, and you say to them, is there one drug you wish you could have invented, that you were around, if you could go back in time or like a time machine? And they might give you this amazing answer. They might say something like, oh, I don't have to go back in time. Right now, I wish I could find a treatment for Parkinson's or something, because my dad has it, and blah, 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 blah. And so that'll get them to really open up, and also they'll have opened up voluntarily. And so, you'll be engaging with them. They're engaging with you, and you'll be able to engage with their audience through the, say, blog post you write about, or even through the research. And you can even, you kind of use that to inform your pitches, for instance, later on.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on, like, just a thing. It's like, I think it connects a lot with the idea of like, you want to have a non-typical conversation when you're trying to understand either your potential customer or the people that you're working for. And I think that this idea of like having that question that they wouldn't have thought you were going to ask is going to break them out of that. And here's the standard answer to the standard questions that I'm used to getting. You'll get something from that you can then leverage in every pitch that I've ever done. You need that piece of a story, that like clickbait heading that you talk about, in order to get people to be interested in what you're talking about. If it's, I was talking to a pharma CEO last week and they said this, and that's something that wasn't just from a standard routine interview questions, I think that's going to go miles further for you. So it's really interesting how that connects. Yeah.
Plus it shows you've done your research. But then they'll often say that, another sort of tip in doing interviews, if you get a particularly kind of tricky question to ask them, that you feel they may not be, say for instance, it's something kind of slightly controversial, like a product launch that failed or something, right, in the past. Leave that till the end, okay, of the interview, because you just in case it goes south, you don't want it to go south early. But oftentimes, people love to hear about failures, because they say, okay, I've had failures too, and if that man or that woman who had that business, had that catastrophic failure, then maybe it's not so bad. And then now they're this amazing success. So it's I don't think it's any harm in sharing failures, because it just humanizes you as a corporate leader, so, or a business person. If
you're in the world of startups and you can't talk about failure, you're in the wrong business, I'd say.
Yeah. So. and then just one last thing in interviews. Don't be afraid of pregnant pauses, and doing it yourself. Like if you ask a question and they're taking a few seconds to answer, just sit with that. because they're probably considering, like really considering their answer, and they're going to give you a much more rounded reply than you might have expected. So just sort of let the time work with you and give them some time as well. So to formulate what they want to, what's in their head that they really want to get out.
Absolutely. I'm over here taking notes.
And then I guess the last main learning is don't overcomplicate things. So I did the storytelling workshops and the investor pitching workshops, and in investor pitching, it's really important to be as absolutely clear as possible in your pitch and the message you're trying to get across about your product or your service. And for instance, I think I read that LinkedIn was pitched to investors as Facebook for business. So you immediately know, oh, okay, I get it. And if you've got your pitch script, and obviously you don't want to learn it off by heart. You want to know the sense, because if you learn it off by heart, you're going to come across robotic. But if you have this sort of general script in front of you, just make sure that the sentences don't run on too long. And a really good way to measure this is listen to the RT News headlines on the radio, or any other, or news talk news headlines, because they're written, the sentences are constructed so that they give the newsreader time enough to catch their breath. And also so as they give you a chance to sort of break down, what's going on here. And so, so the first line would be something like, the government today announced a new plan in the fight against COVID, right? And then, then you get into the specifics of it. So listen to the radio headlines, and also buy, say, the Daily, or the Star, or the Irish Star, or the Irish Sun, because when I got back from the States, I moved back in 2005 after 12 years there, and I started, working for a bunch of different papers, but the main sort of learnings I got were from working as a radio researcher. So that's how I got to, you would write the introductions for the presenters, and so the first script I wrote for Pat Kenny was about this dispute over walkers, the right to walk on farmland, essentially, and right away in rural parts of the country. And I was so excited because you're only writing about 3 or 4 sentences in that introduction that they're reading out, and then you write the Q&A, as to how the interview may go, so as the presenter has enough an idea what are the main issues involved here and the key points. And so some briefs might be sort of anywhere from 3 to 6, 7 pages maybe. And so when I read out my first introduction, so excited because he read out everything, but he left one word out, which was an excellent choice because it was extraneous. It wasn't really needed anyway. So yes, so as well, listen to the radio headlines, listen to the introductions to these stories and these radio magazine shows as well. And also when I worked for the Irish Sun, I got those are really, really hard headlines to write. Sometimes only 2 words in the headline, but when you're actually, editing the copy of those stories, again, they have to be really quite short sentences. So I'd encourage students to get a copy of the Irish Sun and just look at the news stories on the left-hand columns or the right-hand columns, and that'll give you an idea of the kind of pattern and pace of your sentences, and how you can pace yourself in writing better scripts. Again, that you're not going to learn off by heart, but just writing, just knowing the sense of them for your pitches. So, but that's really important because, essentially, the brain of the audience is going to switch off that you're pitching to if anything's too complicated, because there's 3 sort of main parts of the brain, and what we have is the reptilian brain in the center, which is sort of the fight or flight response. So say you're walking down the street at nighttime and there's no street lights, you kind of sense somebody's behind you and you turn your head. That's the reptilian brain acting, because its main job is to help you survive. That's its overriding number one job. And so the limbic system it regulates emotional responses. And then the neocortex is the analytical part of the brain, which crunches the data essentially. So when you're there in the audience, and you're listening to a pitch, if your reptilian brain says, "Oh gosh, this is just, it's just too complicated, I'm going to switch off," it's the gatekeeper for allowing your neocortex to engage in the rest of the pitch as an audience member. Because the reptilian brain is a cognitive miser, and because its one job, as I said, is to keep you alive, to make sure your bodily are functioning, and and to be alerted to the fact that there may be not at any one stage or whatever in a crisis. It's not going to spend time or spend cognitive power or spend its energy really, because the cognitive power is in the neocortex. So the reptilian brain is not going to spend its energy on things that do not engage it. And something, because it's the oldest part, it needs sort of simple engagement. So once you sort of have clarity in your pitch, then the audience can kind of relax and say, okay, now I'm ready to start processing this information through my neocortex. So it's really, really important that you don't obviously lose your audience within the first couple of minutes of the pitch. So
absolutely. I guess that's like, so obviously in the intro to this, that last line that obviously you had the intro for me, that last line of you had a line picked up by a big show. Everybody wants to hear now what that's about. And so that's kind of like at the intro to your pitch, you want to have that opening that then people will respond to later on and go, oh, now I've learned, aha, that was what I was looking for. Is that what you're getting at? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And one last thing, if people want to read further on the neuroscience part of this, I got really into the neuroscience storytelling after go back to college and doing an MA in screenwriting in 2014, 2015, and in IADT. And so I was a big fan of Game of Thrones, and no spoilers here, but there were 8 seasons. After season 3, I was like, I think I know who's going to win the Game of Thrones, essentially. And so I guessed correctly, and I wish I put a bet on it. So, because the answer is real 5 years later, and if you look on the internet, a lot of people hated that ending. I loved the ending. To me, it made perfect sense. Without giving too much away, it's got to do with the power of opposites in storytelling. That's what I'll say for now, and that links into neuroscience as well. And if anybody wants to go onto my LinkedIn page, there's a whole article where I explain that once you've seen the finale of Game of Thrones, only read it once you've seen it, because there are spoilers in it. But it is a fun article. I think I'm saying biased, but it does try to sort of explain how your brain engages with stories essentially, and what kind of makes them come alive. So
absolutely, that's amazing, Brian. Well, I have your LinkedIn shared up here on the screen, so everybody can absolutely find you there to learn more and dive into more of what you do. I have one more little screen that was your closing screen, the storiesforbiz.com. That's the website, right? Or Brian at Story4Biz. That's your email. Yeah, and yeah, I appreciate all that you shared today, Brian. But as you recommended, like, I want to ask you a question that's going to surprise you potentially a little bit. Just if you're not nothing too crazy. Obviously, we're talking about storytelling. We're talking about like kind of like what is that big, like trying to create that iconic moment, that thing that people are going to click and want to listen to next. What's the most recent thing that you've seen yourself get clickbaited by? So you were looking at something and you got clickbaited, and then 5 hours later found yourself reading that article. If you could think of it, I'd just be curious, what clickbaits someone who specializes in doing that?
I'm trying to think of specifics. Let's see. I guess there's a few things on Facebook, but they're sort of, totally built for clickbait. There's a lot of websites, as you know, they give you sort of a third or half of the headline, like, and you kind of have to, clickbait it.
You have to see what's next.
Yeah, there's it's. Now that I've been put on the spot, I'm trying to, I'm having this massive brain fart.
That's okay. No, I know it can be hard once it's on the spot, but it's interesting, even just the insight about the fact that today platforms are almost built around that concept of that is the model for how you get someone's attention and then carry it on. Yeah.
Well, there was one I saw yesterday, actually. You nicely filled in there so I could grab a moment to figure something out. It was about John Boyega and Star Wars, and he said that working in Star Wars was like being in actors' luxury jail. So I was like, oh, I kind of had an idea what it's talking about, but I wanted to sort of make sure I was on the right page. So I clicked on that last night, and basically, of course, he was saying that you get paid a lot of money, but and it gives you some sort of security, financial security. But you're tied to this one character the whole time, you don't grow. Whereas if you work on a lot of different characters, you have a much bigger chance to grow, because he made a movie, I think it's called Small Axe, with Steve McQueen last year. It was on BBC recently. So.
Very cool. Always interested to see into what you're seeing. I want to be on top of it. So I appreciate that. Just gonna stop share my screen here. Brian, thank you so much again for coming on. And everybody who's watching live, thank you for jumping on. And everybody who's watching the recording back, all the links to the various things we shared on screen will be in the description of the video.
And if you want to ask me any questions through the email or whatever, that's fine too. I'm happy to, or LinkedIn or whatever. So.
Absolutely. Amazing. Thanks again, Brian. And until next time, thanks for watching Tangent TV, everybody.
Thank you.